welcome back from the break. Glad to see everybody still here. I'm always worried during the break if we half leaves or whatnot, but it's still a full room, so awesome. You guys want to know more about VanillaJS. So to kick off, again, you guys all know who I am, Matthew Potter, run the group. Don't want to say anything of the whole, this is what I did, this is what I'm doing. Not interested in that, you guys are interested in this. So kick right off. VanillaJS. I was thinking about this, doing the presentation, doing this talk and this whole event for the last almost 6 months. People are familiar with the Back to Basics events we've been doing, right? Yeah? So one of the original intents of the Back to Basics was to write the JavaScript. Back to Basics for JavaScript, Back to Basics for HTML, and Back to Basics for CSS. It's the last one that we're doing, although this isn't a Back to Basics event. We'll likely do one for JavaScript for that. But in that event, I want to incorporate jQuery. I want to incorporate underscore. But with things like the jQuery event that just happened, with mean stack event that's happening this weekend, I really wanted to focus on giving you guys the tools, the resources to code in native JavaScript, right? So you're doing mean, you're doing Angular and Node and all these things on the server side. You can't really use a lot of these other libraries. Yes, there's certain things that you can join in there. There's certain additions and prototypes and shims that you can add. But you're writing for native JavaScript, or in other words, for vanilla JavaScript. Some of the other names I was thinking of for this, obviously don't pay a dime for a $. Leave your $signs at the door. Dropping the $sign only makes sense. And making sense without the $sign. Very, very corny, very, very cheesy. But unfortunately, I felt it was going to be a bit too pointing the finger at jQuery. When it's not just them, there's a ton of libraries out there. And quite frankly, they're all great, right? They're all awesome. Who here uses jQuery in almost every project? Right? Yeah. It's really, really good. It's really, really awesome. There's plugins for everything, like anything, right? You want to do this, this, this. Oh, do I need to code all that? No, you just go type in jQuery plugin to do insert anything here, and it's there, right? Cross-browser compatibility, major, major thing. Obviously, with our friends in Microsoft, with their product that won't be named here. But luckily, as of next week, is it next week, guys? As of next week, IE 7, no more. That's it. XP's gone. Yes, absolutely. Clapping, not for me, that's for damn sure. But all of the things I'm going to show you here tonight are all IE 8 and up, right? So if you're supporting IE 8 for any of your projects, all of this, with the exception of, I think, one caveat that I will mention and talk about, will be completely compatible and you can use today. Cool? Other things, browsers, obviously, that it'll make you, works for browsers that make you cry, including Safari Mobile. Anybody upset with the new Apple Safari mobile device browsers? Yeah? Horrible, horrible thing. And error handling. And quite frankly, it saved your ass more than you can count, more than you probably know. It's done things behind the scenes that has fixed your problems. At least I know it has for mine, and I want to make sure that it is given props for that. But it was great when it started, right? It was great when you first got into code. It was so fast and jumping, and it worked, right? It was like jumping into a brand new Ferrari. You got there, or in this case, a Porsche, I guess. You got in, you started driving, and all of a sudden, things just clicked. The world was blasting you by, and you're going really good. But then this happened. Started doing things and loading up slowly and having, oh, we need to have this and have that and have this, and now we're doing animate, and we want to have this method of doing things and this method. Oh, but then you still have all those developers that didn't upgrade or that aren't upgrading or that are using latest, and so it has to do backwards compatibility. So now we're stuck with a giant, massive thing that can carry almost anything, but it's all spotted and put together, right? It's not really what it used to be. It doesn't really shine and glisten. It's not something you want to have sitting in your driveway, right? People are loading it. People are using it. It's massive. But I say that, and you guys think about this. When you write jQuery, this is what you see, right? If I can I zoom in? Yay, I can zoom in on this. Of course I can. When you write jQuery, this is pretty short, right? This is how to select content within a span of an H5 tag, right? If I click on it, or I click on an article, I'll let you guys read this, and we'll go through some of the code later. In fact, what's coming up next is demonstration of this code and why it is that I don't think you guys should be using a lot of jQuery. It's small, right? It's tiny. You're not writing a lot of JavaScript, right? So why is it so bloated? Well, the reason is because you're not writing a lot of JavaScript, right? It's doing all of that computation for you. It's doing all of the thinking for you, the cross-browser compatibility, the DOM manipulation, the saving the variables, all that stuff. It's doing everything for you. So if you take a look at this code, which we'll go through a little very, very shortly, the reason why it takes so long to do is because it has to travel through the DOM and through the whole document a bunch of different times. You might only be going through and saying, hey, look, I want to select the span in the H5 of the article that I clicked, right? Again, very rudimentary, very, very basic. Click on an article tag, give me the first span content of an H5. Why? It has to travel through to get the span. It has to travel through to get an H5. It has to get the article tag, all that information. So it's going through that DOM multiple times to get that from you. So let's see what exactly we're doing here. I've got an absolutely outstanding website here that is, as you can see, a great product idea that everybody has heard of before, right? It's the next new Facebook, this time without Oculus Rift. I'm glad they did something recently so I could throw in a joke there. This brand new page, very, very little content on it. I'm going to open up the source code. Here's the source code. Very, very simple. Not a lot of classes, not a lot of IDs. There's a little bit here. All this code's online. You can go see it afterwards. Take a look at yourself. It's very, very clean, very, very simple. So if you do a DOM selection, right, this is what it is in jQuery, right? That same code with a little bit of extra here that I will use for demonstrations in a moment is what you're looking at, right? Click on, so on click, take the article that you've clicked, grab the first H5 span within that, and then return me the value of that. Bigger? You guys can't read? That better? Bigger? You got it. Thank you for the people at the back for doing this. I appreciate it. I thought it was big enough. It is not. There we go. We're good now? Yeah? Awesome. I will be sure to do all the other pages as well. So very, very simply, it comes up, it logs in what that element's text was, right? So I'm going to jump over to the index of this. I am going to open up the right one, and I am going to say, only run the jQuery for this. So the jQuery, if I click on it, really, refresh, come on. Thank you. jQuery, this is milliseconds beside it. I have Joe somebody, jQuery, 1 millisecond. So it's gone through the DOM, found Joe somebody, and brought that out. Great, 1 second, milliseconds, no speed difference. If I take a look at something like native VanillaJS, we're good? Yeah? It's a bit longer to do the exact same thing, right? Obviously, it's doing a lot more code. I'll step through this in a moment, but before I do, I want to show you the difference in speed. You guys ready for this? If you take a look at the two together, right? VanillaJS, 0 seconds, 2 milliseconds. 0 milliseconds, 2 milliseconds. Amazing. 0 milliseconds, 3 milliseconds. 0, 0. So it's negligible, right? Very, very small. Milliseconds, thousandth of a second difference. But this is very interesting. You do see that every once in a while, there is a 1 millisecond for jQuery, right? That doesn't seem like a lot. You'd probably be able to live with that, right? Everybody can live with a millisecond. That's not a big deal. But what if we started doing something, oh, and by the way, this is doing it 10 times, right? Should have mentioned that. This is doing it 10 times. If I say, do this once, so only do it once, refresh this, up, right? Super refresh, still 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, amazing crash in Chrome, thank you very much. if I start adding to both of these, right? 0, 0, 0, 2, okay? How about 100 times? Amazing. It's because of this. It's all scaled up, right? All of a sudden now, jQuery is starting to be a bit sluggish here, isn't it? And the browser is, right? All of a sudden now we're coming up to 0.5, 0.6, right? That's only at 100. Well, what does it take to get VanillaJS to start to slow down? 1,000? Nope. 10,000? Nope. How about 1 million? Come on. There we go. Now we're starting to see some slowdowns. Now jQuery is starting to become on par. But what if we take that 1 million, is that 1 million? Yes, it is. What if we take that 1 million and throw that into jQuery? Right? Anybody want to take a guess at how many or how long that's going to take? I hear 10. Can I hear, do I hear 9? 9? Anybody 9? 9? 8? 8? No? No? Who's counting? Yes, the exact same code can do in milliseconds, right? Major difference. This is also a very, very simple code base. Can you imagine this in a web application, right? You're building this as an AngularJS. So I heard you like divs. Yo, dog. Did that joke backwards. So the DOM elements, when you're navigating through this, every time you go through it, that's a massive amount of information that you're going through. If you do something like use native.js, code would be to do DOM selection, right? So you have an article, a function is called this callback function, right? The callback has a this parameter, which is the item that was clicked, this find h5 span, right? Fairly straightforward, fairly simple. Everybody's probably done code very similar to this, right? If you write vanilla JavaScript, however, what we're doing is, as you can see from the doc, I'm declaring a global variable, which for what I'm doing, I'm creating an application type tool. I'm using a function or here. I'm using usestrict. Who here uses usestrict? Raise your hand. Yeah? That's about half the room. That's amazing. I love seeing that. It's forcing you guys to use the standards. It's making sure that you guys are looking forward to the future. Great. Use usestrict whenever you can. Strongly recommend it. And then I'm declaring that variable function so that I can go in afterwards and then have an initialization function. Similar to what jQuery does, where it creates a jQuery object and says, at the end of creating everything, initialize me, right? So I'm creating that object, and I would do this once per application that I create so that everything goes into here. I'm doing a little bit of a self-masturbation thing here so that I can always refer back to myself, right? Some people think this is good practice, some people think this is bad practice. It's really dependent upon your code context, what you're doing with different things. This gives you the ability to reference yourself for callbacks, actually, which we'll go through and use for this case. This.dom elements is just a simple best practice that I like to do, where I like to keep all the DOM elements that I'm selecting and holding onto within one variable, just to keep things nice, tidy, clean. And if I'm doing any debugging, I can go directly into the console and say, hey, DOM selection.dom elements, give me a list of everything you have and what you selected and be able to control all of that without having to have a giant list of all these different variable names. Purely a personal preference. You guys are more than welcome to use this, but I keep all of my DOM element selections into a single object. So I'm setting the post container. So I'm going to pull up the DOM selection. Wrong key. I'm going to pull up the DOM as well here so that you guys can see. It's this one. And here. Come on. There we go. So I have a document.getElementById of posts, right? Similar to the hashtag. Everybody's seen this. ID, right? That's document.getElement by ID. In its native form, exactly the same thing. Every browser since, I believe, IE6, Taz, do you know? It basically just works. If you're doing IDs, there's no reason for jQuery here. Document.getElement by ID, great. And most of the stuff, most of the selectors, most of the containers you all have are IDs, right? Who uses classes for every little thing? Nobody. Excellent to hear. So I'm selecting the posts container, which is this section here called posts. It contains everything that I have. Then I'm saying, hey, how about I get the posts now? Instead of just having the post container, grab all the posts. Here, I'm using something kind of new. Anybody here heard of the query selector? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, a few of you. So there's two different things that you can use here. There's document.querySelector and document.querySelectorAll. What those are exactly the same as the $, period for class, hashtag for ID, nothing for selecting a tag. All of those attributes that you could select, it's essentially the exact same thing as sizzle, right? So if I wanted to do, hey, give me a query selector of anything with a class of article, I add a period in it. Now it selects everything with an article. This is native code. There's no extra code to this. There's no plugins. There's no nothing. What's interesting, this in benchmarks is, again, stupid fast, like ridiculously faster. I've got some examples in the meetup page. Anybody that scrolled down in the description, there's a link to a bunch of examples of this code. All of those, you can test it yourself using several of the online testers. It's incredibly fast. Query selector all returns you an array of all of the objects or all of the DOM elements that it had found. If it didn't find anything, it finds an empty array string or an empty array, right? Other things, which we'll go in for just briefly, query selector selects the first item, right? So if you have a bunch of things like a bunch of spans or a bunch of list elements, and you say, hey, query selector li, only the first one's going to be returned to you. And if there isn't one that matches that query selector, an undefined or null will return back to you. So make sure if you are using this, it's not a false. You have to make sure, hey, did it select something? Do I continue with processing? Yes? No? Kind of? Do it again? How about you set me a promise? Anyway, query selector returns only one item. Query selector all will always return you an array, an empty array or a populated array, either one. So then I'm creating several of the different functions. Now remember when Taz said use only one, either the create a function as a variable item within an object, right? I'm doing it this way. I'm not doing .prototype. .prototype is in the next example I will show you. They're both really good. They're both very functional. It's, again, a personal preference, but I find when I do a self-referencing, I'm always keeping that self or this within the same scope. So for me, there's certain things that I know if I need to use the self or there's a possibility, I keep this dot blah equals function to keep it within that same area or that same scope. The next demonstration, I'll give an example of the dot prototype and why that was used. So I've got an initialization, which will run on, anybody know when this will run? Give you a hint. On initialization, exactly. And then I have another function here that says, hey, who wrote this? Right? This who wrote this function will be used as a callback function for when I click, right? Similar to in the jQuery demonstration, that on click article tag function, that inline function to that, I'm creating an actual object to that, or a variable of the prototype to do that. You can do that in jQuery, same functions the same way. I'm just keeping it as part of the single application. And then I have at the very end of this object, or very end of this scope, run that initialization. So what's going to end up happening when I create DOM selection equals new DOM selection, again, that self-mastication thing. Mastication means chew. It's going to run and say, hey, okay, I'm going to create this. Oh, set all my settings, do all this stuff. Oh, run this function. Cool, run it. And because I'm saying create a new one, now DOM selection is that new item. It runs the function. It has all that information, and it's all within the scope. So on this initialize, I'm setting a variable, and I'm running through for however many posts it originally came across. So remember I had set this DOM elements posts, get all of those things. In the DOM elements, I have 3 posts, right? Post ID 1, post ID 2, post ID 3. Does anybody know why those are backwards? Post ID 1 is at the bottom? Raise your hand if you know, or can guess. Sorry? Yes, blog-ish, posts, yes. So when you have a blog, right, it always writes the first one at the end. So I'm just mirroring that and how that would end up coming up. Obviously, the next Facebook, all the new articles would be at the top. See? So anyway, I'm going through those, and what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, those posts, for each one of them, create a new variable on that post that's called author, right? What that should be is get the tag item, right? So self.dom elements posts I get elements by tag item. Everybody seen this one before? Let me actually. Has everybody seen this one before? Yeah? No? Some people? So this, again, backwards compatible. Works in IE. Yes. But what this does is it allows you fast access. You don't need to create that class for every different H5 level. If you are creating a semantically structured, accessible-based site, you're semantically structuring your content, H1, H2, all the way down for the importance of the content, right? Your blog titles are always going to be the first H5 in your post, right? Yes? Say yes. Yes. Or whatever H level that you're doing it, because it's an important element. So I know it's going to be always 0, so I'm going to select. That now, if I go to here and I say DOM selection dot DOM elements 0, which one was it? Posts, right? Posts. Remember all my elements were in the DOM there. There's all my articles, right? There's all my posts. If I say take the first one, or take this first one here, and give me the author, right? It's going to return me the H5, right? That's the DOM element for it. Also what I'm doing, because I'm writing the code and I know how it's going to function, I know I need a certain piece of that element, and the code is specific to my application, I know I'm likely going to need to get a name, right? I'm going to get the author's name for this. So instead of setting that span tag, right, instead of saying, hey, take the author that I have the H5, now select the span tag, and also this way when I do the callback, go through that span tag and get the text content, I'm going to set the actual author of that, or the author's name of that, to the text content already, right? If I look at the code here and I say, okay, fine, author, name, comes back with the text. I didn't have to crawl through any of the content. I didn't have to crawl through the DOM, nothing, it was there. If I look at the source code for this, because I'm writing this for JavaScript, okay, well, let me do the inspect element just so that it's always live, right? Elements, and then I don't need this, I do need that. Go away, go away. Okay. This is when I need Addy. Addy's coming to Toronto next month. So if I go into the main content here, generally you see if you set an attribute, it sets it within the object. But you'll see here, H5 has no attributes, right? There is no style, there is no class, there's no nothing into this. Even though I've said, hey, take that H5. Remember when I had said, take that H5? Everybody says yes. Yes. Take that H5, right? Well, here's all the attributes for it. Here's the actual DOM element itself. If I say author.name, well, there's the name of it. I don't need to crawl through anything to get that. Make sense? So I'm setting the content of that variable author to the content. Now what I'm doing is I'm setting an event listener, right? Does everybody know how to set an event listeners? Right? Everybody does it all the time. We've gone through the jQuery method, add event listener. But what's the problem with the word add event listener? Anybody want to take a guess? Exactly. So I will have a link to this in the description of the meetup page as well. There is a ton of these around, right? This is a shim. This simple little 72 lines, 71 lines of code, which can be minified, makes add event listener work for IE. Don't need to do anything else, just this. Add it, put it in the top of your code, it just works. Cool? After that, we say, hey, on click, what function you want to run, and then if you want to capture everything and not continue with stuff. This is part of an IE. This false that I have at the end here is not a requirement. However, I do recommend putting false. This is the, hey, do you want to stop everything and do what you're doing right now? Or do whatever this function is? Yes, no? Awesome. I say false just to make sure that if there's any other event listeners happening, they also get called, right? So self dot, who wrote this? So when I click on an article, so if I'm saying DOM elements dot posts I, which is the posts item, add event listener click. That post is every article tag. So on article tag, on click, run this function. That function has two different things associated to it that you need to know as a developer. There's two things. An event handler, which is essentially the only thing passed, or one of the first thing passed to a function is an event. Most people just say, hey, event prevent default. So a link, like an href or whatever, it won't go to there. It'll say, hey, I'm going to run this function first, and then I'm going to get back to you, okay? Run the function. Oh, prevent default. Oh, okay, I'm not going to get back to you. Go away, right? That's what it does to the browser. That's what the JavaScript does to the browser. Probably a little less cruel. It's like, hey, I'm not going to get back to you, but here's muffins. So I'm saying prevent default because I don't want anything else to happen. In this case, clicking in an article, nothing would happen anyway. I'm maintaining that. I'm keeping that in there purely for best practices. Yes?
Would that prevent an event handler that had already been attached in the markup from executing?
No. So the prevent default is a default function that the browser takes when it gets a click on that. Other event listeners are not defaulting or default items or default actions upon that action, right? So no, and which is why you have that false that Mozilla is introducing to say, yes, I want to capture everything. So if you clicked on true, it'll get to that one event listener and stop everything until it gets past that or until you say return true or whatever. That's what that's for. So I'm setting a few variables, right? I'm doing some of the stuff here just to make sure that we have the timing that we can change. So var start, grab the date as the absolute value, which is a nice long 10-digit integer float value of the millisecond of right now. Element, which I'm changing, or in this case, changing over 1 million different times. And then I, again, making sure I'm declaring all my variables at the top of every one of my methods or every one of my functions. Instead of going through the DOM like jQuery was, now all I need to do is, hey, that giant article tag, grab the author name, which you already have because it's a variable of that selection. So it's not going through the DOM, it's now saying, set this to the variable you already have referenced, right? Which is why it's super fast. Yes?
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, absolutely.
What's preventing you from saving those same variables in jQuery as well instead of calling like the DOM lookup every time?
You can. The key here is that you're looping over stuff, right? So the example of using jQuery versus not, you're still setting the on-click event. The difference with jQuery, that gets passed in is generally the jQuery object that's been clicked, right? So you still, even when you're doing that, this is still the selector for the DOM element rather than the actual item itself that's been the variable with the event listener. Right? So you're setting that event listener, you're not crawling. Does that make sense? Kind of, not really? Yeah. Technically, yes. You can do this and say, hey, this dot author dot blah, 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 but you're still originally going through your DOM elements multiple times to set all of those, right? So in here, again, I'm just outputting the author's name, vanilla, and the time difference of that. So now, without that, obviously, it's now 14.5 seconds less than jQuery, right? Does that make sense, everybody? Did everybody see the speed difference in that? Yes, if you're doing 1 or 2, doing a quick little grab here and there, great. Another example of where I do think that if you are using jQuery, absolutely use it. If you're creating, like you had said, this whole structure, instead of me saying document.getElementID or document.querySelector or whatever, if I'm using jQuery to do my DOM selection initially only, yes, that makes sense too. But why would you load that giant library just to do DOM selection if you can use all the DOM selection without it? It's another request to the server. If you're doing things in an offline manner, that's another file that you have to save locally, right? If there's new updates to jQuery that might break other things, that might end up happening. jQuery is amazing though. But yeah, if you want to use jQuery to do your DOM selection, great. Don't put it in functions or callbacks or anything if you don't have to. Make sense? I see a couple of eyes are like, what? We're good? Yeah? Yes. Sorry?
Memory leak situation, because it used to be a problem when you're setting properties directly in DOM elements.
So there's certain DOM element properties that are, what you do is you would say, hey, look, I want you to set the style of this, right? DOM element.style equals this, right?
No, I'm talking particularly, I don't know if you heard me, I'm talking particularly about memory leaks. Because now maybe
Gotcha.
I'm too old school, maybe.
So yes, if we're talking thousands upon thousands of items, absolutely there's a memory dependency upon that. But it's at this point, I'm going to say back in the day, but I'm even from that, so nobody take offense to that. Computers, processors, hell, mobile browsers in first gen weren't able to handle a lot of memory capacity. But now, with the speed that we're all at, you're taking up a lot of memory, you're not losing it, or there's no trickle out.
So there's actually not much leaking?
Yes, correct. Right? There's no leakage, you're just using a lot of it to store the variables, right? Versus every time you perform an action, go do something. So everybody here has heard the, web applications will never be as fast as native applications, right? Everybody's heard this, right? Well, that's because we're crawling through the damn DOM every time, right? If we're not crawling through the DOM and we're saving everything in storage, like C++, like C#, like all the native code is, then yeah, we're not going to be that slow, right? So that's the code example. Wow, 14 seconds for jQuery? Yeah, it's a lot. Yes?
So back to your example with the log.
Yes?
What if you got your 3 articles and you've got some sort of AJAX that pulls in the 4th article?
Are you cheating?
Then you click the 4th one.
Are you cheating?
Just looking at the code, wondering.
Amazing question. I'm glad you asked. So, what else is jQuery used for? Right? Raise a hand. Anybody? Oh, wait, you already got it. AJAX, right? Calling in content, calling in DOM structure, or calling in data from other resources. Now, the example I have, I'm going to use a JSON string that you're basically pulling in, right? That could be an API, that could be an external resource, that could be a file that's saved on your server somewhere that you just update, or you have your client say, okay, I'm going to make this really pretty blog, save a file, and then upload that instead of a WordPress backend or whatever. Please don't do that, but you get my point. It's a data source of something. I'm using a JSON file. This is how you do an AJAX call for that. Cross-site scripting, I'm not going to get into that, not tonight, but everybody knows about cross-site scripting, how to hack around different things, APIs with callback functions in the URL, right? Yeah, you guys are all awesome like that? Awesome. Might be another time. So AJAX calls, right? Pretty simple, right? Get JSON, pass an URL, function. It does all the work for you, right? It performs the callback, it performs the AJAX call, sends the data, uses the GET request, and then you have this ability to say, hey, for each one of those data elements, which ignore the fact that I've got 2 little apostrophes around data in the each. Oops, my bad. Just noticed that now. You can then perform a function with it, or perform different things with it. Well, kind of. Okay, so back to coding. Everybody, put your hands up. Everybody, come on. Put your hands together. Bring them down. Please, demo God, make this work for us. Done one demonstration, everything was working good. Got to make sure the second one goes good now too, especially considering all of this is all live on the HTML Toronto server, so I am working in a live environment. Yay. So we have our 0.1. Let's check out our 0.2. We have a 0.2 here that has no content on it, right? Well, that 0.2, I'm going to just close some of these, and yes, save. So 0.2, this is what the source code for 0.2 looks like. A lot less content. Sorry? Absolutely, I can, oh, sorry, I just yelled into the mic. Absolutely. So very simple. The only thing that's different here, I am loading jQuery, right? And I think you probably noticed this before. I'm loading jQuery into these just so that I can run the jQuery code as well. Ignore that. The only thing different here is that the posts object is empty. There's nothing in it. Between this and the original one, it's the only change. The other thing that I have is I now have a JSON file that's been saved with the exact same information. Only, did everybody see the difference here? Everybody see the difference here? The IDs are in proper order, right? Making sure to keep that in note. So, in jQuery, what you would do to create that whole application is this. Did everybody get that? Everybody understand all that code there? It's pretty complex. It's not as simple as it really makes out to be. And yet, if I open this up and I say, hey, do the get JSON, this results in the exact same thing. There's all my code exactly as it was before, right? If you want, we can compare later, but trust me, it's the exact same code. So this code here fits only 31 lines. Technically, that's not bad, but it's fairly complex. You coming in as another developer and looking at this, it would be a damn near nightmare, right? Having to understand where everything goes into where. I see some people in the eyes like, looking, okay, it's great, I love this. And I should have commented this code, and I didn't, and I will hopefully in the next few days, just so that anybody that wants to go online can see the code afterwards and can experiment with it. So this equal in JavaScript vanilla, oops, no, come on, is a little longer, right? It's 115 lines of code, right? The difference, it's got a bunch of reusable code as well, whereas the other one, coming in from jQuery, doesn't. Yes, you can add reusable code for the jQuery to do the request and results, but again, you're just adding more complexity. So here again, we're creating the exact same object. The two things aren't colliding because I'm not loading both of them. I'm keeping it all as the same example here. But again, DOM selection, use strict, blah, 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 use that, don't use this. Everybody uses it, yay, good. Awesome. DOM elements, post container, right? And then posts. So right up to everything here is identical to last time, right? Right up to this, everything's the same. I'm even trying to select all the articles. There isn't anything there, and it returns me an empty array, but I'm still trying to do that. It's going to empty that. It's going to have dom.post as an empty array. If I remove this, did I actually? Okay, good. Outstanding. So if I say in here, this, refresh, Command Option J, posts, right? Really? Not defined. DOM selection, not defined. Oh, do you know what really helps? Actually loading the AJAX. There we go. Right? There's all my posts. Exactly the same as I had before. If I don't load anything, so if I don't do the initialization, so I'm going to remove the initialization of this. There. Refresh. Posts. It's an empty array. Right? I'm not creating anything. I'm not loading anything. That's what it is. I'm going to initialize this. So the difference here is instead of doing all of those other things I did for the first one where you're just doing a selection and doing all of the capturing everything, I'm saying load your posts, right? That AJAX call. So I'm saying load posts. What does load posts do? Well, it runs self.ajax and it creates processing posts. Does anybody know why I didn't put self.ajax self process posts in the initializer? Anybody want to take a guess? I'll give you a hint. It has nothing to do with proper method of doing things or requirements of JavaScript. So everybody want to take a guess at why I did this? No? Because if, in case I wanted to do anything else aside from this asynchronously, right? If I'm running self-load posts, I might want to also say initialize buttons and do this and do that and do this before the content loads. And although I can do that in load posts can be something I can comment out really quickly and not have to destroy all the rest of my stuff, right? I can still debug, I can still do everything else, but the initialization is simply a set of instructions to say, you need to do this every time you load. Cool? Personal preference, but it is something I strongly recommend. So I say self.ajax load JSON file. That AJAX file, remember how horrible this looked when you were starting out? Do everybody remember back, oh Jesus, how long ago, do you ever do any AJAX calls before? Anybody do AJAX calls back in the start, yeah? How nightmarishly different that was, and every time you had to do one, you had to create a new thing, and it was, oh, it was such a nightmare. I don't know why we all thought it was. Sorry?
They're islands or something, and
yeah. So there is, again, a shim for IE for the XML HTTP request. Again, link in the description of the meetup page. I will have it there. Know that that is absolutely possible to do. Again, back to IE 7 and 8. Cool? It's an active X request, something, whatever. You've got a shim available. Go use it. Anyway, the XML HTTP request is essentially that AJAX call. You create a new one, and you add event listeners to it, the ready state, and then you open it, and then you send it, right? So it's interesting here. I'll go over the open and the send in a minute. But what ends up happening is that your browser says, hey, I've already loaded this page. I'm going to make another request, though. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to do some stuff. What you can do as a coder is say, hey, whenever you hear stuff back, like, are you ready yet? No? Yes? What's your status? All those different things is basically when your browser's doing a communication. So when you hit a page initially, you hit the page, goes to that section, your browser gets a response and says, I exist. Then the browser says, okay, cool, give me your content. Here's what I allow, right? The server says, oh, you allow this? Amazing. I'll be just 1 second. Gathers all of its resources, gathers all its things, does its little server-side JavaScript or server-side PHP or whatever it's going to do, or just reads an HTML file and then returns that back to you as content, as different types of chunks. What you're doing in JavaScript here is you're dialing into that and saying, every time you get a status, every time you get something back, doesn't matter what it is, do this, right? Check it. Is the state of it, is the ability number 4, which is a ready state of 4, is yes, I'm done, I've completed, you can hear back from me. Is the status of things 200? 200 meaning, everybody know what status of 200 is? Okay. It's okay. So unlike status of 400 or status of 401 or 202, all those different status elements, those are all different things. You're checking here to make sure ready status is 4, which means it's done, and everything is good, right? If you do, take that response request and convert it to JSON, right? JavaScript works with JSON back and forth. You can talk back and forth. And then if there's a callback function sent in, so you have a URL and a callback function, if callback exists, run the callback. Does everybody know why we don't just say, hey, run the callback, even though it's declared at the top? Does anybody know? Anybody ever do any one of those like clicks? I see a Taz's hand about to go up. Taz.
Because it could be undefined.
It could be undefined, but why would you have it undefined?
If you don't pass a second argument, it could be undefined.
Yes, but why would you not pass a callback to an AJAX request?
I feel like you know the answer to that.
I do know the answer to that. That's a very good wraparound. Yes. Have you ever done a thing where it's like you click a button and you just want the server to do something or be notified of something, and you don't need to do anything with the data? You just want to say, hey, look, this person clicked this. I just want to tell you, they clicked it, right? So tracking purposes, You might want to say, every time somebody's tracked on something, send an AJAX request, right? AJAX request of a get, here's the thing they clicked. Don't do anything else. I'm not stopping the propagation. I'm not preventing anything default. You've made the request. I've captured that. Don't need to do anything else. I'm done, right? Everything's good. So that's why you would say, if callback, then run callback, right? Only then. And you pass in what the JSON request was, or the JSON result of the response. You can also do things here like, hey, is it a JSON file? Like properly do a check to say, is the first line an object element, like the character 1? Is it a curly brace or an array item? Should be doing validation. For this example, I'm not because I know the code. Yes?
Why wouldn't you parse the JSON if you have a callback only? Like, why are you bothering parsing it when you're not doing anything with it?
You'd still need to parse the JSON file anyway. When you send a request out, that comes back as a string, right?
Right, but you don't care, you don't have a callback, so you just go on with your business. That parse line can be inside the if callback.
You're right. Absolutely. You are absolutely right. In fact, I will move that right now. That's a great response. The only other thing that I would say with that is that response should be declared at the top of the function as well. But yes, he's right. Unless there's a callback function specified, you don't need to convert to JSON. Absolutely. Great catch. Damn. Thought I would have caught that. Nice. Okay. So that's on ready state, right? So every time there's something that's changed in the ready state, perform this function. Hey, is it the status 200? Is it 4? Yes? Cool. Then do this. After we've set the callback, we want to open things, right? We want to say, perform that request now. Here's the URL. I want you to use get. Now go, right? Which is that open function. So we've got the callback function. That callback function is now going to say, when we go up here, that callback function was process posts, right? So for cleanliness sake, process post is the next thing in line, right? Process posts gets the posts back. Now I know this is an array, right? As an array item, I'm going to say take the start date time just for our coding testing later on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, append the post, or self.append post, which is another function. Going through this quickly because I just realized it's 8:41, and I apologize for that. I did not expect to be going this long. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm saying, hey, if there's a post length, meaning, hey, if there's anything that's responded, then perform the following. For each one of those posts, append the post, or run this function to say append post. That append post is this function here. This horribly, oh my God, why is it so long? All I want to do is add a damn blog post, right? So in jQuery, everybody knows how to create an element, right? In jQuery, if you wanted to create something, you would say, why does my shift not work? Amazing, right? You would say article. Awesome. This is how you create an article tag in jQuery, right? That would return you DOM element. You would then append it to something. You would then send it up to somewhere. What I'm doing here is I'm doing what jQuery is doing natively. I'm saying for every one of those elements, document.createElement, and then what the element is, right? Everybody's seen this before. Has anybody not done create element like this? One person? Couple people? A few people? Bunch of people. Everybody raised their hands. Everybody does it. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating all of these data points, all of these entry points for me to go in and say, add this, add that, add this. As a structure thing, I'm keeping all of my DOM creation together, right? Then what I'm doing, you'll notice here, as soon as I create author, by the way, does everybody see what I'm doing here? That author.name equals postdata.name, which corresponds to postdata.name, right? So exactly the same way. In fact, you were mentioning, somebody here was mentioning how, what about creating in through AJAX? In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing here. So I'm creating all those things. Then what I'm ending up doing is I'm setting the attributes. You had asked, is it possible, or why am I not just saying, hey, dot blah, 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 or is that a memory leak? If I set any type of attributes to a DOM element, I personally always use set attribute, just to make sure that the browser knows this is not a variable of the object. I'm actually setting a data attribute to that, right? In this case, post ID dash blah, 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 is my new attribute. Question? No? Scratching your nose? Amazing. Making sure. So here's one of the things I wanted to make you guys aware of. There is 2 methods to add classes, right? Or 2 methods to create new classes. Elements, content, class list. So if you have an element, like a DOM element, it has an attribute of class list, right? So if I go in and I say document.head, right, returns me the document head. If I say document.head, by the way, don't do this, class list, returns me an error. Class list doesn't contain anything because it doesn't actually have a thing. Let's do instead document.querySelector h1. See, demo gods, h1, right? Dot class list, right? Empty. If I say class list dot add test, right? If I have that here, come on. So do you see the length? Right? You have length, item, all these different things. There's an array of different items on this. If I say class list, or how about class list dot add a secondary class, blah, right? Now, if I went in and I inspected this element, you notice there's a space in between there? It's going in and knowing that there's something there. Right? It's going in and adding that without having to go in and modify the string. The DOM itself is recognizing that. It's a really good way to manage class lists because you have things like remove, add, exit, like all those different ones that you generally do in jQuery to say, does it have this, does it not have this, all that stuff. It's available to do directly in here. The problem with this is that it's only possible to do in IE 10 and up. Every other browser allows for it, except for IE 9, 8, and 7. So I want to make sure you guys are aware. If you are doing this, I recommend taking a look at it. If you're doing future-proofing or you have an environment, class list is a much easier way to manage your classes. Otherwise, I'm just saying set attribute class to ramblings, which is very appropriate. So after that, I'm capturing the content. I'm not going to go over exactly what I'm doing here. You can take a look at the source code later. Basically, I'm double-checking to make sure that it's just a line of text. If it's not a line of text, which in some cases, like the top here, it isn't, you're going to see a tag h4 text equals this, allowing for things like a subhead or anything else within the content. I'm allowing that for here in the JavaScript code. If I had more time, I'd walk you through that. Aside from that, I'm setting text content instead of HTML to prevent people from injecting things like extra tags or whatever into things like the header, the subheaders, and the things that I want to have complete control and style over. For things like the list, because I don't want to have to go and create every list element with every attribute of everything, of every href or the icons or whatever, I have an inner HTML and then I have a giant long string and I have a replace, right? Has everybody seen these templating methods before where you had the double curly braces, right? Angular, very, very similar. This is reminiscent of that. So this leads into the AngularJS talks, right? So I'm doing this and saying, hey, here's just the giant list. Go replace it with this content. That's another way of doing it and making sure that it's set to inner HTML. And then what I'm doing is I'm going through DOM by DOM element and in order, appending the children, right? Hey, take the post title, add it to the header. Take the author, add it to the header. Take the author's name, which is a span, add it to the author's in the header, right? Continuing on down. Right up to the end, after everything's all put together, I say insert before, right? And I say grab the first child and insert before. And the reason I'm doing that and not insert after, exactly, right? Or append child, I'm not appending child at the bottom, I'm saying insert after the first element to ensure that all the blog posts go in order. Exactly, right? That's what I'm doing in JavaScript. Again, fairly complex, a lot more complex than what jQuery would be, which is just basically going through and saying, hey, this dot append dot set attribute of this dot append dot set attribute. That was kind of a rhythmic thing. a lot more complex, but let's take a look at the differences in speed. So this is, keep in mind, only 3 blog posts. Only 3, right? So let's take a look at AJAX, right? 3 milliseconds, right? This is VanillaJS, 3 milliseconds. jQuery. Anybody want to take a guess before I do this? 6. Double the time. Do this over 20 posts, 30 posts, 50 posts, right? Do this over the course of your server, right? How many times a person visits their site? That compounds, that adds up, that adds complexity. And to go back into this and say, like, I'm going to zoom out here. I know you guys probably can't read it. Even without the commenting, okay, probably not that far. In your honest opinion, which code would you rather work with? Which code? Be honest. Left or right? I won't take offense. Yes. The longer one? Yeah? Everybody else agree or disagree? Anybody else think the jQuery? jQuery? It is easier to work with. It is easier to see. But as soon as you start doing things like commenting in here, or you know what, even breaking the jQuery out. I'm doing a lot of things in line, right? I'm doing a lot of things like, oh yeah, here, and then post here, and do this. And like you can start doing things and commenting it out and spreading it out as well. Absolutely. But if you came into a project and you saw all these jQuery things, that would be just overwhelming, right? As somebody else's code, that would be daunting. So that's another reason for me why I use VanillaJS. Set all my DOM elements, have quick access to them. I can set my, my event listeners directly to the DOM elements rather than having to wait for the DOM to load, then go through the DOM again to set the event listeners, right? You're doing everything as soon as it loads. And again, just to make sure I'm reiterating, every time I load the JavaScript, whether it be AJAX or not, the JavaScript is always at the bottom, which means I never need to have document.ready equals, or then doing the function callback for that. I'm always loading everything at the bottom. Keep that in mind. Messed me up at a ton of projects. So one last thing, actually back to the presentation here. Yay, more live coding. Thankfully that worked. Hopefully, I'm writing this before I know. Yes, obviously that hopefully worked for everybody here. But before I go, before I ask any questions or answer any questions, I wanted to quickly do a interesting little thing. Taz brought this up. I had to do a quick search for the code for this, but I'm hoping it's somewhere. Do I have it? It's in the other document. Outstanding. Selection. Hey. Does anybody know what that line will do? Hmm?
I'm Batman.
And it crashes! Yes! Thank you, Chrome. Awesome. Thank you. So, questions? I see at the back first. Yes. I'm saying always, with the exception of something like jQuery, where it's a library where it doesn't perform any methods, it just provides you access to tools. jQuery, underscore, like all those libraries, load them at the top. All of the content in the JavaScript that you're writing, put at the bottom. This way, all of your DOM elements, all of the document is already loaded. You don't have to set an event listener to wait for things to load. In fact, that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying in the JavaScript file, I'm loading the JavaScript file at the bottom. Yes. So the question was, should you be loading the content, and how do you do that, and what if it's a separate file? Any other questions? Yes. I'll give you 1 second.
I understand that everything right. So what am I losing by doing that?
Time coding. Yes. The advantage to so the thing you lose is time coding. The things you gain is time coding, because going back through this, loading the document up, working with other people, this promotes good practice for coding. So although you might lose time for yourself, you're gaining time for your customers. And quite frankly, the amount of time over the course of a year that you gain from customers is more than you lose for yourself. So what's preventing you from making your own libraries?
No, I'm saying by the time that project grows, most probably I'll be trying to build something like a library for myself.
Mm-hmm.
The usable parts of the code and the stuff. What prevents me to build another jQuery?
Nothing. Go build jQuery. Absolutely. Go build a better jQuery. Absolutely.
Yeah, he doesn't want to do that.
Well,
Exactly.
you don't. So okay. So the question is more. You don't want to. You don't want to have to rebuild the tool set that's available to you, right? And you don't have to. jQuery is there for you to use. It's absolutely amazing. I want to reiterate this. jQuery is not a bad tool. It's overused, right? jQuery basically says, I'm going to load all these different tools and assets and resources and sizzle and all this information for you to use. But if you're just using a site that provides like a simple blog or a chat window with Node.js or whatever that's going to be, if all you're doing is DOM selection and an AJAX request or DOM selection and a socket connection, then why are you loading a giant, massive library to do that when the exact same thing for you to do would be far less code and far faster for both you and your audience?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Actually, I prefer
I install jQuery in most of the products I build. Production, done, I'm in. Yeah, but for DOM selection, I don't use it. I use it for things like I need a great plugin to do an overlay of a model box for the images that I have. Great, I'm going to create that list, I'm going to create the DOM elements, I'm going to create my JavaScript. Then when it comes time to draw up and bring up that DOM element for jQuery's plugin, that's when I switch over to jQuery. That's when I use the power of that for plugins. Absolutely. You had a question.
Yeah, just in general, like you said about defining all your variables and stuff
Yep.
of a function, is there an advantage for that, or is it just for readability?
Standards. You can declare your variables anywhere you want. Coding standards. In fact, the majority of code, in fact, all of the code that you saw tonight on the right-hand sides, all of it conformed to JSLint. So whenever I try to share code out to you guys as well for any of the projects, any of the presentations that I do, the coding examples through WebBite, they all conform to JSLint, which is a standard which basically says, here's the formatting that comes down. You probably also noticed here, I equals 0, I is less than blah, I plus equals 1 rather than I plus plus as well, right? It's just a standard method of formatting code for others to be easily read. Variables declared at the top of a function are purely for best practices, and they make sure that that variable is declared later on down the road when you try to request it. If it hasn't been declared, you might run into an error, which is another reason for that. But yeah, you can declare them anywhere. Yes? Somebody here had a question. No? Any other questions? No? Awesome. Thank you so much for coming out. Taz